We often speak about wealth as though it were an external condition, something visible, measurable, and largely determined by circumstance. Yet when observed carefully over long periods of time, prosperity reveals itself less as a moment of arrival and more as a pattern of behavior. What distinguishes those who accumulate resources steadily from those who remain financially fragile is rarely a single decision, a stroke of luck, or a defining event. It is, more often, a collection of mental habits quietly repeated, rarely discussed, and almost never dramatic. These habits do not announce themselves. They operate beneath the surface of daily life, shaping choices so small they often go unnoticed, yet so consistent that their effects compound into substantial outcomes. Many of us grow accustomed to interpreting financial success through visible results rather than invisible processes. We notice the comfort, the freedom, the apparent ease, and we assume these are signs of advantage rather than consequence. Over time, this misinterpretation creates a subtle distortion. We begin to think in terms of thresholds rather than trajectories, in terms of access rather than discipline. But careful observation suggests that long-term prosperity behaves more like a gradual alignment between behavior and time. It rewards consistency rather than intensity, restraint rather than ambition, and clarity rather than optimism. In everyday life, money tends to respond to how we manage uncertainty. Those who develop wealth tend to structure their lives to reduce the number of decisions that must be made impulsively. They design environments, routines, and commitments that limit exposure to unnecessary risk. This does not reflect fear or conservatism in the emotional sense. Rather, it reflects a deliberate respect for the cumulative effect of small errors. Over time, avoiding repeated minor losses often proves more powerful than pursuing occasional gains. Many of us underestimate how frequently our financial outcomes are shaped by what we choose not to do. There is also a notable difference in how time is perceived. For individuals who struggle financially, time is often experienced as pressure. Bills arrive, obligations accumulate, and the future feels compressed into urgent demands. In contrast, those who maintain financial stability tend to treat time as an ally. They allow outcomes to unfold gradually, understanding that patience is not passive but strategic. This difference in perception subtly influences daily behavior. When time feels scarce, impulse feels justified. When time feels abundant, restraint becomes rational. Discipline in this context is not a matter of force or denial. It is a preference for order over chaos, for predictability over surprise. We observe that disciplined individuals rarely rely on motivation to govern their financial behavior. Motivation fluctuates but systems endure. Over time, prosperity tends to follow those who create structures that function even when attention wanes or emotions shift. These structures are not elaborate. Often they are remarkably simple, but they are respected consistently. Many of us believe that financial discipline requires constant vigilance. Yet those who embody it most effectively often appear relaxed about money. This apparent ease can be misleading. What looks like indifference is usually the result of earlier effort invested in clarity. When boundaries are well defined, decisions require less energy. When priorities are settled, temptation loses much of its force. The mind, no longer burdened by constant negotiation, can remain calm. Impulse, by contrast, thrives in ambiguity. When goals are vague, spending becomes expressive rather than intentional. Purchases serve emotional functions, filling gaps that have little to do with necessity. Over time, this pattern erodes financial stability not through excess, but through inconsistency. The issue is not the occasional indulgence, but the absence of a coherent framework within which indulgence can be placed without consequence. A notable mental habit among the financially secure is the separation between identity and consumption. Many of us use spending as a way to signal competence, belonging, or success. Those who accumulate wealth tend to resist this linkage. They do not treat money as a tool for self-definition. Instead, it remains a resource to be managed, not a language to be spoken. This distinction reduces the emotional charge surrounding financial decisions and allows choices to be evaluated more objectively. Responsibility in this setting is not framed as self-blame but as authorship. To accept responsibility for financial outcomes is to acknowledge influence without assuming total control. External factors exist, but they do not absolve us of agency. This mindset encourages adjustment rather than resentment. When results disappoint, the response is rarely dramatic. Instead, there is a quiet recalibration, an examination of patterns, and a gradual correction. Over time, this approach fosters resilience. Financial stability is rarely linear. Periods of progress are often interrupted by setbacks. What matters is not the absence of disruption, but the capacity to respond without abandoning long-term orientation. Those who maintain prosperity tend to absorb shocks without allowing them to redefine their trajectory. They distinguish between temporary deviation and permanent failure, a distinction that preserves continuity. Another habit emerges in the way effort is distributed. Rather than seeking maximum return in every decision, the financially disciplined aim for sustainability. They avoid overextension, recognizing that exhaustion compromises judgment. This restraint applies not only to spending but to ambition itself. Goals are pursued with persistence rather than urgency, allowing room for error without collapse. We also observe a preference for clarity over complexity. Many assume that wealth requires sophisticated strategies or intricate knowledge. Yet long-term observation suggests that complexity often introduces fragility. Simpler systems are easier to maintain, easier to understand, and easier to adjust. Those who accumulate wealth tend to prioritize transparency in their financial arrangements, even when more elaborate options are available. This clarity extends to expectations. Unrealistic projections create emotional volatility. When outcomes fail to match inflated hopes, disappointment can trigger impulsive correction. By contrast, modest expectations allow progress to feel sufficient. Satisfaction becomes available without excess. Over time, this emotional stability reinforces consistency. As the narrative of prosperity continues to unfold, it becomes evident that intention plays a decisive role. Intention, unlike impulse, is oriented toward coherence. It asks whether a decision aligns with a broader pattern rather than whether it satisfies an immediate desire. This orientation does not eliminate pleasure or flexibility. It simply situates them within a larger context, where they no longer dominate. Many of us underestimate how frequently financial outcomes are shaped by repetition. A single disciplined act has limited impact. A disciplined pattern, sustained quietly, alters the landscape entirely. This repetition is rarely celebrated. It lacks drama and produces no immediate transformation. Yet it is precisely this unremarkable persistence that defines long-term prosperity. Patience in this framework is not waiting without action. It is acting without expecting immediate resolution. Those who cultivate wealth tend to tolerate delayed feedback. They continue behaviors whose benefits are not yet visible, trusting the logic of accumulation rather than the sensation of progress. This trust is not blind. It is grounded in observation, reinforced by consistency and refined through experience. We notice too that financially stable individuals are selective about attention. They do not engage deeply with every opportunity or threat. Attention is treated as a limited resource, allocated deliberately. This selectivity reduces noise and preserves focus. Over time, fewer decisions lead to clearer outcomes. There is also an acceptance of trade-offs. Prosperity does not eliminate limitation, it clarifies it. Choices are made with awareness of what is being foregone. This awareness prevents regret from undermining discipline. When sacrifices are acknowledged rather than denied, they lose their emotional charge. As the relationship between behavior and time continues to assert itself, prosperity emerges less as a destination and more as a condition of stability. It is not defined by excess but by margin. Margin allows for error, for rest, for adaptation. It reduces anxiety and increases optionality. This, more than any display of abundance, constitutes financial security. We often assume that confidence follows success. Yet in financial life, confidence frequently precedes it. Not confidence in outcome but confidence in process. Those who trust their systems are less reactive, less susceptible to panic, and more capable of staying aligned during uncertainty. This calm persistence, sustained over years, yields results that appear impressive only in retrospect. Over time, the accumulation of these mental habits creates a distinctive posture toward life. Decisions are approached with deliberation rather than urgency. Resources are allocated with foresight rather than impulse. The future is not treated as a threat to be managed, but as a horizon to be respected. Ultimately, prosperity reveals itself as a byproduct of order. Not rigidity but structure. Not austerity but balance. It is shaped by habits that prioritize coherence over excitement, continuity over intensity, and intention over impulse. These habits do not guarantee wealth, but they create the conditions under which wealth can emerge and endure. In observing these patterns, many of us may recognize elements already present in our own behavior, as well as gaps that remain. The value of this recognition lies not in judgment but in awareness. Awareness, when sustained, has a quiet way of reshaping choices. Over time, those choices, repeated calmly and consistently, become a life that feels less strained, more deliberate, and quietly prosperous. As this pattern continues to unfold, we begin to notice how restraint functions not as limitation, but as orientation. Restraint, when viewed superficially, is often mistaken for deprivation. Yet in the context of long-term financial behavior, it appears instead as a form of clarity. It reflects an understanding of proportion, of scale, of what matters now versus what matters later. Many of us struggle not because resources are insufficient, but because attention is scattered. Restraint gathers attention. It narrows the field of action so that effort is no longer diluted across competing impulses. In daily life, financial choices rarely present themselves as major crossroads. They arrive quietly, embedded in routine, disguised as minor conveniences or harmless exceptions. Over time, the accumulation of these small deviations determines far more than any single decision ever could. Those who maintain financial stability tend to recognize this dynamic intuitively. They treat repetition as consequential. A choice made once is an event. A choice made daily becomes an environment. Prosperity responds to environments more reliably than to intentions. We often underestimate how quickly comfort adapts. What initially feels like improvement soon becomes baseline. This adaptation is neither good nor bad. It is simply human. However, when spending is driven by the pursuit of renewed stimulation, satisfaction becomes elusive. The financially disciplined recognize this cycle and step out of it. They do not expect consumption to provide lasting fulfillment. As a result, they are less prone to chasing incremental upgrades that offer diminishing returns. Another mental habit becomes apparent in how uncertainty is managed. Many of us respond to uncertainty with acceleration. We act quickly to relieve discomfort, even if the action itself introduces risk. By contrast, those who build wealth tend to slow down when clarity is absent. They allow uncertainty to exist without immediate resolution. This tolerance reduces the likelihood of reactive decisions. Over time, fewer errors compound into greater stability. Planning plays a role here, though not in the sense of rigid forecasting. Planning, in this context, is an acknowledgement that future conditions will differ from present ones. It is a refusal to assume continuity without preparation. Those who practice it do not attempt to predict every outcome. Instead, they prepare for variability. This preparation creates resilience, allowing systems to absorb stress without collapse. We also observe a consistent distinction between appearance and substance. Many of us are influenced by visible markers of success. We infer stability from lifestyle, confidence from display, security from scale. Yet the behaviors that sustain prosperity are often invisible. They take place away from public view, in private routines and unremarkable decisions. Those who understand this are less tempted to equate visibility with value. This distinction affects social comparison. Financially disciplined individuals tend to limit the role of comparison in their decision-making. Comparison introduces noise. It shifts focus from personal coherence to external validation. Over time, this distraction undermines consistency. By maintaining a reference point rooted in their own structure rather than others' outcomes, they preserve autonomy. There is also a notable relationship with delay. Delayed gratification is often discussed as a virtue, but in practice it functions as a skill. It requires emotional regulation, patience, and trust in future benefit. Those who cultivate it do not suppress desire, they contextualize it. Desire is acknowledged, not obeyed. This subtle difference preserves agency. In this light, discipline appears less as control over behavior and more as alignment between values and action. When values are unclear, discipline feels restrictive. When values are settled, discipline feels natural. The effort lies not in constant resistance, but in initial clarification. Many of us skip this step, attempting to enforce discipline without defining purpose. The result is fatigue. Consistency emerges again as a central theme. Financial outcomes respond disproportionately to consistency because time amplifies stable patterns. Erratic behavior, even when occasionally brilliant, produces unreliable results. Those who accumulate wealth accept modest progress in exchange for predictability. This trade-off is rarely glamorous, but it is effective. We notice as well a measured relationship with risk. Risk is not avoided entirely, nor is it embraced recklessly. Instead, it is assessed in proportion to capacity. Those who manage risk well understand that survival precedes optimization. Protecting the ability to continue matters more than maximizing short-term gain. This perspective favors longevity over intensity. Attention to detail also plays a role, though not obsessively. Small inefficiencies are addressed not because they are dramatic, but because they are persistent. Over time, friction accumulates. Removing it improves flow. This approach applies equally to habits, obligations, and commitments. Simplification is pursued not for minimalism's sake, but for sustainability. We often find that financially stable individuals maintain buffers. These buffers are not expressions of fear, but of respect for uncertainty. They provide space to respond rather than react. With margin, mistakes do not escalate into crises. Without margin, even minor disruptions can destabilize the entire system. Another subtle habit concerns narrative. Many of us tell stories about money that justify behavior. These narratives may emphasize hardship, unfairness, or exceptionality. While such stories can be emotionally satisfying, they often obscure agency. Those who build wealth tend to avoid elaborate financial narratives. They focus instead on mechanics. What is happening? What can be adjusted? This pragmatic orientation reduces emotional entanglement. Responsibility, revisited here, is again notable for its quiet nature. It does not involve self-reproach or pride. It manifests as attentiveness. When outcomes diverge from expectation, attention increases. Patterns are examined. Adjustments are made. There is no need for drama. Over time, this steady responsiveness produces refinement. We also observe an absence of urgency. Urgency compresses time, making short-term outcomes feel decisive. Those who maintain a long-term orientation resist this compression. They understand that most financial situations evolve gradually. By refusing to treat every fluctuation as decisive, they preserve perspective. This perspective influences emotional regulation. Financial decisions made under emotional strain tend to prioritize relief over coherence. Those who cultivate stability invest in emotional steadiness. They recognize when emotion is influencing judgment and pause accordingly. This pause, repeated often, prevents misalignment. As these habits accumulate, they shape identity indirectly. Not through labels or aspirations, but through lived experience. Confidence emerges from predictability. Calm emerges from margin. Flexibility emerges from structure. Over time, these qualities reinforce one another. The relationship between effort and outcome also becomes clearer. Effort alone does not guarantee prosperity. Direction matters. Effort applied inconsistently dissipates. Effort applied steadily compounds. This understanding discourages both overexertion and resignation. It supports measured persistence. We notice that financially disciplined individuals are selective about commitments. They avoid obligations that introduce long-term strain without corresponding value. This selectivity preserves capacity. Capacity, once depleted, compromises judgment. Protecting it is a strategic act. Another habit involves review. Not constant scrutiny, but periodic reflection. Systems are examined not to assign blame, but to ensure alignment. This reflection is factual, not emotional. Over time, it maintains relevance. As the narrative continues, prosperity appears increasingly detached from external markers. It becomes a quality of process rather than outcome. The process, once established, generates results with minimal intervention. This autonomy is perhaps the most understated advantage of discipline. In this context, wealth is less about accumulation and more about preservation. Not hoarding but continuity. Resources are managed so they endure. This endurance allows attention to shift toward other domains of life without anxiety. We begin to see how these mental habits interact. Restraint supports consistency. Consistency reinforces patience. Patience enables planning. Planning reduces risk. Reduced risk preserves margin. Margin stabilizes emotion. Stable emotion improves judgment. Judgment sustains restraint. The cycle is self-reinforcing. Many of us encounter these principles gradually, often through experience rather than instruction. Their power lies not in novelty but in reliability. They do not promise transformation. They offer stability. Over time, stability proves transformative enough. As this second phase of reflection settles, the emphasis remains on process over event, habit over impulse, and continuity over acceleration. The quiet architecture of prosperity continues to take shape, not through force or spectacle, but through alignment patiently maintained across time. As this architecture of behavior solidifies, we begin to observe how prosperity, once stabilized, subtly reshapes perception itself. Financial discipline no longer feels like an active practice. It becomes a background condition. Decisions are filtered almost automatically, not because desire disappears, but because judgment has been trained through repetition. What once required effort now requires little thought. This transition marks a quiet threshold, the movement from conscious control to internalized order. Many of us imagine that wealth changes people by expanding options. In reality, it more often narrows focus. When scarcity recedes, the urgency to extract value from every moment diminishes. This allows for a more measured engagement with life. Financially disciplined individuals tend to approach decisions with patience not because they have fewer pressures, but because they have learned how pressure distorts judgment. They recognize the cost of haste, having seen it accumulate over time. At this stage, prosperity reveals itself less through accumulation and more through predictability. Income may fluctuate, markets may shift, circumstances may change, yet the underlying system remains intact. This continuity provides psychological stability. When the future is not perceived as a constant threat, energy can be allocated more deliberately. Anxiety no longer dictates action. Choice regains its proper scale. We notice, too, a refined understanding of sufficiency. Sufficiency is not a fixed number or a static condition. It is contextual, shaped by expectations and habits. Those who sustain prosperity rarely pursue an ever-moving threshold of enough. Instead, they define acceptable ranges. Within these ranges, variation is tolerable. Outside them, adjustment is required. This flexibility prevents both complacency and excess. Another mental habit becomes evident in how success is interpreted. Financial stability does not produce complacency, but neither does it invite celebration. Outcomes are acknowledged without exaggeration. Gains are integrated quietly. Losses are absorbed without panic. This emotional neutrality preserves clarity. When results are neither glorified nor catastrophized, learning remains possible. Over time, learning itself becomes a continuous process rather than a response to failure. Financially disciplined individuals refine their systems incrementally. They do not wait for breakdowns to prompt review. Small inefficiencies are addressed early. This attentiveness prevents accumulation of error. It also reinforces a sense of agency grounded in observation rather than control. We also observe a mature relationship with effort. Early in the pursuit of stability, effort often feels heroic. Long hours, intense focus, and sacrifice dominate. Later, effort becomes quieter. It is applied where it matters most and withdrawn where returns diminish. This discernment preserves energy. Prosperity, sustained over decades, depends as much on conservation as on exertion. This conservation extends to emotional labor. Financially stable individuals avoid unnecessary conflict around money. They resist debates that produce heat without clarity. Disagreements are approached pragmatically. The goal is resolution, not validation. This restraint reduces friction within personal and professional relationships, preserving stability beyond finances. Another subtle habit concerns adaptability. Stability does not imply rigidity. Systems that endure are those designed to evolve. Financially disciplined individuals adjust their frameworks as conditions change, without abandoning underlying principles. This balance between consistency and flexibility prevents obsolescence. It allows prosperity to remain relevant across different phases of life. As the long-term perspective deepens, we notice a shift in how risk is contextualized. Risk is no longer assessed solely in financial terms. It is evaluated in relation to time, energy, and attention. Opportunities that promise financial gain but erode stability are approached cautiously. The question becomes not whether something is profitable, but whether it is sustainable. This orientation reshapes ambition. Ambition persists, but it is tempered by proportionality. Goals are pursued within the constraints of capacity. Overextension is avoided not because of fear, but because of experience. The cost of imbalance has been observed and internalized. Prosperity, in this sense, is protected by wisdom rather than restraint alone. We also observe a refined understanding of trade-offs. Every allocation implies exclusion. Financially disciplined individuals accept this without resentment. They recognize that choosing one path necessarily limits another. This acceptance prevents regret from undermining commitment. When choices are made with awareness, they are less likely to be revisited emotionally. Over time, this clarity fosters contentment, though not complacency. Contentment arises not from abundance, but from coherence. When actions align with values, internal conflict diminishes. Financial decisions no longer feel like compromises against oneself. This internal alignment reduces stress and enhances persistence. Another mental habit emerges in how information is treated. Financially stable individuals are selective consumers of information. They avoid constant exposure to noise, trends, and speculative narratives. Information is evaluated for relevance rather than novelty. This selectivity protects judgment. When fewer signals compete for attention, decisions become clearer. This restraint applies equally to advice. Not all counsel is useful. Financially disciplined individuals weigh advice against context. They recognize that strategies effective in one environment may fail in another. This discernment prevents imitation without understanding. Prosperity, sustained, resists formulas. As these habits converge, prosperity increasingly resembles a state of balance rather than accumulation. Resources are sufficient, systems are resilient, and attention is available. This availability allows for engagement with life beyond financial management. Money recedes into the background, functioning as intended, a tool rather than a preoccupation. We often assume that such stability requires extraordinary intelligence or discipline. Yet observation suggests otherwise. The habits described are accessible, though not easy. They require patience more than brilliance, consistency more than intensity. Their effectiveness lies in repetition rather than innovation. At this stage, the relationship between time and behavior becomes fully apparent. Time rewards alignment. It magnifies what is repeated and diminishes what is sporadic. Financial prosperity, viewed through this lens, is not mysterious. It is the predictable outcome of systems allowed to operate uninterrupted. We also see how early missteps lose their power over long horizons. Mistakes made years earlier matter less than patterns maintained consistently thereafter. This perspective offers relief. Perfection is unnecessary. Correction is sufficient. What matters is direction sustained. Responsibility, now fully internalized, manifests as stewardship. Resources are managed with care, not anxiety. There is an understanding that prosperity, once achieved, requires maintenance. Neglect can erode even robust systems. Attention, though reduced, remains present. Another habit worth noting is humility before complexity. Financial systems are influenced by forces beyond individual control. Those who endure do not overestimate their influence. They prepare for variance without assuming mastery. This humility preserves adaptability. As the narrative approaches its natural conclusion, prosperity appears less as an endpoint and more as a condition of continuity. It is sustained not by constant effort but by enduring habits. These habits, once established, require minimal reinforcement. They become part of identity without being named. Many of us may recognize fragments of these patterns in our own lives. The value of recognition lies not in aspiration but in awareness. Awareness alters behavior subtly, often without conscious intention. Over time, these alterations accumulate. In observing the mental habits that support long-term prosperity, we find no grand gestures, no defining moments, no dramatic transformations. Instead, we find a quiet consistency, a preference for order, and a respect for time. Prosperity emerges not as a reward but as a consequence. This understanding reframes the concept of wealth itself. Wealth is not an event to be reached but a process to be maintained. It is shaped daily by choices so ordinary they rarely draw attention. Yet over years these choices define outcomes. As we step back from this reflection, what remains is not instruction but perspective. A recognition that financial stability is less about doing more and more about doing consistently. Less about reacting and more about aligning. Less about accumulation and more about continuity. In this light, the millionaire mindset reveals itself not as a set of secrets, but as a way of relating to time, behavior, and responsibility. It is quiet, deliberate, and enduring. And for those who adopt it, often without naming it, prosperity follows not suddenly, but steadily, shaped by habits allowed to unfold across time.